A voice, as cold as a pressurized cabin, cuts through the airport chaos. "I'm sorry, we're going to have to deny your check-in." For Dr. Keisha Washington, those words weren't just an inconvenience. They were a declaration of war. She was a black woman in a tracksuit, tired from a long week. The gate agent, Brenda Vance, saw a problem. What Brenda didn't see were the credentials in Keisha's bag, credentials from the Federal Aviation Administration. Brenda thought she was bumping a nobody off an overbooked flight. She had no idea she had just grounded a federal inspector, and in doing so, had just shut down her entire career. The air in Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 2 was a familiar soup. It smelled of stale coffee, jet fuel, and the faint, sugary tang of a Cinnabon 2 gates down. It was a smell Dr. Keisha Washington associated with 60-hour work weeks, lukewarm hotel rooms, and the pressing, vital importance of her job. Keisha was, by nature, an observer. It was her trade. As a senior field investigator for the FAA's Office of Aviation Safety, she didn't just look at planes. She looked at systems. She analyzed the metal, the software, and, most importantly, the people who made them all work. She understood that human failure, ego, fatigue, bias, was 1,000 times more dangerous than mechanical failure. Today, however, she was just a passenger. Or so she tried to be. She was flying Global Airways, Flight 714, to Washington, D.C., Reagan National. In her briefcase was a preliminary report on the runway incursion at LAX last month. In her mind was the 8 a.m. briefing she had to lead at the NTSB headquarters the next morning. She was dressed for the 3-hour flight in a way that prioritized circulation, black high-end joggers, clean white sneakers, and a matching zip-up hoodie over a simple t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She looked, she thought, like a tired traveler. Which is precisely what gate agent Brenda Vance saw. The line at gate B12 was a tangled mess of rollerboards and anxiety. Keisha had checked in online, but a last-minute equipment change had scrambled the seat assignments, forcing everyone to re-verify at the counter. Keisha stood patiently, her bag at her feet, listening to the gate agent. Brenda Vance was a woman who wore her authority like a second uniform. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a helmet, her red lipstick was a perfect, sharp Cupid's bow, and her Global Airways name tag was polished to a high sheen. She was, Keisha observed, brutally efficient with certain passengers. A man in a tailored navy suit, Mr. Henderson, his luggage tag read, was processed with a "Have a wonderful flight, sir." A young white family, struggling with a stroller, was given a "Don't you worry, we'll get you pre-boarded." Then it was Keisha's turn. She stepped up to the counter and placed her driver's license on the scanner. Brenda did not look up immediately. She finished typing a long sentence into her terminal, clicked the mouse 3 times, and then, with an audible sigh, turned her eyes to Keisha. It was not a glance. It was an assessment. Brenda's eyes traveled from Keisha's sneakers, up her joggers, and settled on her face. A tiny, almost imperceptible sneer tightened her lips. "Name," Brenda clipped. "Keisha Washington." Brenda tapped the keyboard. Tap, 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 tap. "I don't see a priority check-in for you." "I wasn't in the priority line," Keisha said calmly, gesturing to the general boarding sign. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She tapped again. She stared at her screen, her face masked in that specific, frustrating neutrality that customer service workers use when they are, in fact, about to declare a problem. "Yes, Washington. I see your reservation. Basic economy." She said the words, "basic economy," as if they left a bad taste in her mouth. "Yes, that's correct," Keisha said. Brenda looked up, her blue eyes as flat and cold as a winter sky. "Well, I'm afraid this flight is critically overbooked." We've had an equipment change, and we're losing 30 seats. We're going to have to move you to a later flight. Keisha felt the familiar prickle of adrenaline, not panic, but focus. I'm sorry. A later flight isn't an option. I checked in 24 hours ago, and I have a confirmed seat, 4-9B. I have a federal briefing in D.C. at 8 a.m. This was, Keisha knew, the wrong thing to say. It signaled importance, and to a person like Brenda, importance from someone who looked like Keisha was a challenge. Brenda's smile was thin and sharp. A federal briefing. She repeated it, savoring the condescension. Well, basic economy means you are at the bottom of the list for reseating. It's our policy. The best I can do is put you on standby for the 9 p.m. flight, which connects through Charlotte. You'd get into D.C. around 2 p.m. tomorrow. The line behind Keisha was growing. People were sighing, checking their watches. "Mom," Keisha said, keeping her voice level. This was a system. She just had to find the override. "There must be something you can do. Can you check for volunteers first? Or check the standby list? I am a confirmed passenger for this flight." "Mom," Brenda said, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. "I've already told you the situation. You were selected by the system." "Can I see the screen?" Keisha asked. "Can I see where the system selected me?" This was a direct challenge to Brenda's authority. Brenda's face flushed a dull, angry red. "I am not permitted to show passengers my screen. You are holding up the line. Please step aside, and I'll print your new boarding pass for the Charlotte flight." "I'm not stepping aside," Keisha said, her voice dropping to a quiet, firm register. "I'm not accepting that flight. I need you to find a solution for this flight." Brenda stared at her. It was a power play. Keisha could see the calculations in her eyes. This black woman, in her casual clothes, was refusing to be dismissed. Brenda was not used to this. "Next," Brenda called out, looking past Keisha to the man behind her. "Sir, I can help you here." The man, flustered, tried to shuffle around Keisha. "No," Keisha said, not moving. She placed her hand flat on the counter. "You are not checking in another passenger until you have resolved my ticket. You have not given me a valid reason for denying my boarding." "A valid reason?" Brenda snapped, her composure cracking. "The valid reason is that the flight is full, and your ticket is the cheapest one. Now, if you don't step aside, I will be calling security." "Security?" Keisha raised an eyebrow. "For asking you to honor my confirmed ticket?" "For being disruptive!" Brenda pointed a long, red-nailed finger at Keisha's chest. "You are causing a disturbance. I know your type. You come here thinking you can bully your way onto a plane. It's not happening. Not at my counter." The words, "your type," hung in the air, thick and toxic. Keisha's internal analyzer clicked into place. Bias. Confirmed. Escalation. Imminent. "Okay," Keisha said softly. "I understand. Before you call security, I need to speak with your supervisor." Brenda actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, you want a manager? Fine. He'll tell you the exact same thing, and he'll probably have you escorted out for your trouble." She grabbed the radio on her belt. "Mark, I've got a disruptive passenger at B12, a basic, who's refusing to accept an overbook." "Yes, one of those." She clicked off the radio, a look of pure, venomous triumph on her face. "He'll be here in a minute, and you'll be on your way. Just not to D.C. Keisha Washington stood her ground. She looked at Brenda, then at the junior agent, Carlos, who was pretending to be fascinated by his keyboard, his ears bright red. She looked at the impatient passengers. The system was failing, and when the system failed, Keisha Washington went to work. The 5 minutes it took for the supervisor to arrive felt like an eternity. The tension at gate B12 was a physical thing, a heavy blanket pressing down on everyone. Brenda Vance, having called for backup, was now actively ignoring Keisha. She adopted an air of supreme theatrical busyness, clicking her mouse, sorting paper stubs, and answering the gate phone with an overly professional, "Global Airways, this is Brenda. How may I help?" Keisha, meanwhile, remained planted at the counter. She did not tap her foot. She did not cross her arms. She simply stood, projecting an aura of immovable patience. This, she knew, was infuriating Brenda more than any shouting ever could. The man who had been behind her huffed and moved to the other agent, Carlos, who processed him quickly, shooting nervous, apologetic glances toward Keisha. Finally, a man with a slightly too large suit and a harried expression power-walked up to the counter. His name tag read, Mark Jensen, Customer Service Supervisor. He had the weary, put-upon look of a man who spent his entire day putting out fires, often with the wrong extinguisher. "What's the problem here?" Mark said, not addressing Keisha, but Brenda. "Mark, thank God," Brenda said, laying on the drama. "This passenger," she gestured to Keisha, "is refusing to accept that the flight is overbooked. I've explained the basic economy policy to her multiple times. I offered her the 9 miles p.m. connection through Charlotte, and she's refused to move from the counter. She's holding up my entire boarding process and being incredibly disruptive." Mark Jensen sighed. He clearly trusted Brenda implicitly. He turned to Keisha, his eyes already glazed over with corporate non-apology. "Ma'am, I'm afraid Ms. Vance is correct. In a weight and balance, or equipment change scenario, the system automatically selects the lowest fare tickets for involuntary denied boarding. It's not personal, it's just the computer." Keisha's gaze was steady. "Mr. Jensen, I appreciate you coming over. I have 2 problems. First, I have yet to be shown any proof that I was selected by the system, as opposed to by your agent. Second, I just watched Ms. Vance check in a family of 4, who, by their own admission in line, were also on basic economy tickets. They are now seated on the plane." Mark's eyes flicked to Brenda. This was new information. Brenda jumped in, her voice high and defensive. "That's completely different. They were a family with children. We have a different policy for. A policy of accommodating families is admirable," Keisha cut in, her voice slicing through Brenda's. "But it is not the policy you just quoted to me. You quoted lowest fare, system selected. Now you're quoting a family exception. Which one is it? Or are you simply making up the rules based on who you're looking at?" Mark Jensen was starting to look uncomfortable. He could see where this was going. He was a middle manager, and this was escalating toward a formal complaint, which meant paperwork. "Look, ma'am," he began. "Dr. Washington," Keisha corrected him. Brenda scoffed audibly. "Oh, doctor? A doctor of what?" Mark shot Brenda a shut-up look, which she ignored. "Dr. Washington," Mark restarted, "even if there was a manual override for the family, the fact remains, the flight is full. There is no seat for you. I can offer you a $200 travel voucher and the 9 p.m. flight. A $200 voucher won't get me to my NTSB briefing at 8 a.m., Keisha said. "I am not accepting the rebooking. I am confirmed on this flight. I expect you to honor that." Brenda, seeing her supervisor falter, decided to create a new line of attack. Her eyes scanned Keisha and landed on her bag, a standard issue, black, hard-shell rollerboard. "And besides, Mark," Brenda said, her voice dripping with newfound confidence, "she's also non-compliant on her baggage." Keisha looked at her bag. It was the exact same bag she had carried on to over 300 flights in the last 5 years. "Her carry-on is clearly oversized," Brenda declared, pointing at it. I told her she would have to check it, and she refused that too. That alone is grounds to deny boarding. This was a rookie mistake. Brenda was piling on, creating new justifications. To an investigator like Keisha, this was an admission of guilt. Mark looked at the bag, then at Keisha. "Ma'am, is that a compliant bag?" "It is," Keisha said. "It fits in every sizer this airline has." "I don't think so," Brenda said, smiling now. She walked over to the metal sizer, the dreaded cage, and tapped it. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I can see from here that it's at least 2 inches too wide. You'll have to check it. And since you're basic economy, that'll be a $75 fee." This was the new tactic. She wasn't just trying to bump Keisha, she was trying to humiliate and penalize her. She was counting on Keisha being too proud or too angry to pay, which would give them the passenger non-compliance excuse they needed to call security. Keisha looked at Brenda. She looked at Mark. Then she looked at the bag. "Fine," Keisha said. She calmly picked up her rollerboard, walked the 3 steps to the metal sizer, and placed it inside. It slid in perfectly, with an inch to spare on all sides. A passenger in line, a young man with headphones, let out a short, "Oh snap." Brenda's face, which had been a mask of smugness, instantly turned to stone. She was caught. She had lied, publicly and verifiably. Mark Jensen closed his eyes for a brief second. This was getting worse. Keisha slid her bag out and rolled it back to the counter. "So," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "It wasn't the system, it wasn't the family exception, and it wasn't the bag. It seems to me I'm being denied boarding for one reason, and one reason only. And that, Mr. Jensen, is a violation of federal law." Brenda, backed into a corner, did the only thing she could. She doubled down on the most damaging lie possible. "Mark," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but loud enough for Keisha to hear. "That's not all. When I pulled up her reservation, it was flagged. A red flag. From corporate security." The shift in the air was immediate. The bored, impatient sighs from the passengers died, replaced by a tense, nervous silence. Security flag was a loaded term. It meant TSA. It meant no-fly lists. It meant danger. Mark Jensen, who had been pale with frustration, now looked genuinely alarmed. His eyes snapped from Brenda to Keisha, and his posture straightened. This was no longer a customer service dispute. "Brenda," he said, his voice low, "are you serious? A security flag?" "Yes," Brenda said, her eyes locked on Keisha. She was all in. "It came up when she first scanned her license. That's why I told her the flight was overbooked. I didn't want to make a scene, Mark. I was trying to handle it discreetly." It was a brilliant, malevolent piece of improvisation. She had just rewritten the last 10 minutes. She wasn't a prejudiced agent. She was a brave employee protecting the flight from a threat. Keisha Washington stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. Brenda had just escalated this from a civil complaint to a federal one. "A security flag," Keisha repeated, her voice void of all emotion. "You are alleging that my name, Keisha Washington, is on a security watch list." "I'm not alleging anything, ma'am," Brenda said, her confidence surging. She had Mark back on her side. "I am telling you what my system says, and it's a red flag, which means I cannot, under any circumstances, allow you on this aircraft. And you, Mr. Jensen," she said, turning to her boss. "You can't either." Mark was nodding, his face grim. "She's right. Ma'am, I'm afraid this is out of our hands. A system flag is final. We can't override it at the gate level. So what happens now?" Keisha asked, her mind working with cold, analytical precision. We have to call the TSA liaison, Mark said. They'll want to talk to you. You will be detained until they can clear you. Detained, Keisha said. She looked around. The other passengers were now looking at her not with impatience, but with fear. A few of them subtly took a step back, pulling their children closer. In an instant, Brenda had turned her from an inconvenienced passenger into a pariah. A threat. So, to be crystal clear for the record, Keisha said, speaking slowly and clearly, Brenda Vance and Mark Jensen of Global Airways, Flight 714, are stating that my boarding is denied due to a system-generated security flag. Is that your official, final position? Yes, Mark said, trying to sound authoritative. That is our position. Now if you'll please come with me, away from the boarding area. I'm not going anywhere, Keisha said, except onto that plane. Mom, you are not listening. Mark's voice cracked with stress. This is a security issue. You are not flying today. And if you don't cooperate, you will be arrested by airport police for interfering with flight operations. Brenda smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. She had won. She had found the one lie that couldn't be disproven by a baggage sizer. Call them, Keisha said. What? Mark looked confused. Call the TSA liaison. Call airport police. Call your corporate security office in Dallas. Call all of them. Get them here, right now. Brenda scoffed. She's calling our bluff, Mark. It's not a bluff, Keisha said. She calmly unzipped the front pocket of her hoodie. She wasn't reaching for her phone. She was reaching for the lanyard tucked inside her shirt. She pulled it out. It had 2 cards on it. One was her airport-issued cider badge, which gave her access to secure areas of any airport in the country. The other was her official credential. Brenda Mark, Keisha said. You've made 2 mistakes today. The first was profiling me. The second... She let the credentials fall, and they clacked softly against the zipper of her hoodie. The second was lying about a security flag to a federal officer. Mark and Brenda both leaned forward, squinting at the laminated card. They saw the seal of the Department of Transportation. They saw the official hologram. And they saw the words, printed in bold, unmistakable type. Federal Aviation Administration Office of Aviation, Safety. Dr. Keisha M. Washington, Aviation, Safety Inspector. There was a long, ringing silence. Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from Mark Jensen's face, leaving it a sickly, grayish white. Brenda, Keisha said, her voice like ice, you don't have a security flag. I am security. The credentials hung in the air between them, a pendulum that had just swung the balance of power so violently it knocked the breath out of both agents. Brenda Vance stared, her brain visibly trying to process the information. The woman in the tracksuit, the basic economy passenger, the disruptive element. It was all colliding with the gold seal of the dot. That's a fake, Brenda whispered. It was a desperate, flimsy defense. Keisha didn't even blink. Mr. Jensen, she said, her voice now in full command and control mode. My cider badge number is OHR774A. My FAA credentials are on file with your O'Hare Station Chief, Mr. David Chen. I suggest you call him. Right now. Mark Jensen was fumbling for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. David, this is Mark at B12. I need you here, immediately. It's the FAA. Keisha held her ground, her gaze fixed on Brenda. You fabricated a security flag, Miss Vance. You didn't do it to be discreet. You did it to win an argument you had already lost. You used the threat of federal detainment as a customer service tool. The system, Brenda stammered, looking at her screen as if it would somehow spontaneously generate the lie she had told. There is no system flag. Keisha stated, "and you and I both know it. You have committed a direct violation of 49 CFR Part 15444, which governs airline security protocols. Falsifying a security threat is not just a fireable offense, Ms. Vance, it's a federal one." The passengers in line were now whispering, their phones out, though no one was brave enough to visibly record. The man who had said, "Oh, snap," now just looked terrified on Keisha's behalf. "Now," Keisha continued, "here is what is going to happen. Mr. Jensen, you are going to hand your radio to Carlos." She nodded at the junior agent, who looked like he was about to faint. "Ms. Vance, you are going to step away from your computer. Do not touch the keyboard. Do not log out. Do not touch anything." "You can't do that," Brenda shrieked, her fear finally giving way to righteous indignation. "We have a flight to board. You are not my boss. You're interfering." "I am investigating," Keisha corrected her. "You have, by your own admission, a compromised security situation at this gate. You've alleged a security threat, which you now seem to be retracting. As a federal aviation inspector, my primary duty is to ensure the safety of this flight. And right now, you are the single greatest threat to that safety." She pulled out her own phone. She didn't dial 911. She dialed a number from memory. "This is Inspector Washington, badge 774A. I am at O'Hare, Terminal 2, Gate B12, Global Airways. I am invoking my authority under Title 49, Section 114. I am conducting an immediate operational audit of this counter. I need the O'Hare FAA field office to send a representative, and I need this airline station chief to meet me here, post-haste. I have 2 agents, Brenda Vance and Mark Jensen, who have knowingly fabricated a passenger security threat. This counter is to be considered a hot site. Secure the logs." She hung up. Mark Jensen looked like he was going to be physically ill. He unclipped his radio and handed it to Carlos, who took it with a trembling hand. "Ma'am, Dr. Washington, please," Mark pleaded. "It was a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. Brenda, tell her you made a mistake." Brenda was frozen. Her entire world, the small kingdom of Gate B12, where her word was law, was disintegrating. She had been so secure in her assessment of Keisha, so confident in her own power, that the reality of the situation was simply too much to compute. "Brenda," Keisha said, her voice softening just a fraction, but not with kindness, with clinical precision. "Did you lie about the security flag?" Brenda's eyes darted from Keisha to Mark, to the passengers, to the phone in Keisha's hand. She was being hostile," Brenda whimpered. I felt threatened. I thought maybe she was a threat. The way she was dressed, the way she argued. It was a confession. She had profiled Keisha, found her threatening for no reason other than her appearance and her refusal to be cowed, and had escalated it all the way to a federal security incident. "Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Vance," Keisha said, noting it in her mind. "Mr. Jensen, you backed her claim without a single second of verification. You were about to have me, a federal officer, detained based on an agent's feeling. You have failed in your duty as a supervisor." "Please," Mark whispered. "My job, my pension." "You should have thought of that," Keisha said, "before you decided my rights were less important than your agent's ego." A new figure came sprinting down the concourse, a man in a crisp suit with a Global Airways pin, his face a mask of controlled panic. "Dr. Washington, I'm David Chen, the station chief. I just got the call. What on earth is happening at my gate?" Keisha turned to him, her credentials still hanging from her neck. "Mr. Chen," she said, "your counter is shut down." David Chen was a man who understood chain of command. He was the highest authority for global airways at O'Hare, but he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the woman in the tracksuit with the FAA badge trumped him. When the FAA audits a gate, planes don't fly. "Shut down," he said, his voice strained as he tried to keep his composure in front of the 150 passengers waiting for Flight 714. "Dr. Washington, can we please discuss this in the jet bridge?" "No, Mr. Chen, we cannot," Keisha said firmly. "This did not happen in private, and it will not be resolved in private. Your agents, Miss Vance and Mr. Jensen, publicly and maliciously discriminated against me. They then escalated that discrimination into a fabricated security threat. This entire counter is now an active investigation site." Chen looked at Brenda and Mark. Brenda was now openly crying, silent, fat tears of terror and rage rolling down her cheeks. Mark just looked hollowed out. "Brenda, Mark, my office." "Now," Chen snapped. The request was not a negotiation. "Hand your security badges to Carlos." "David, please," Mark begged. "She's—" "My office, Mark. Go!" Chen barked, his face red. He then turned to the junior agent. "Carlos, go to gate B14. Assist Agent Simmons. Get these passengers processed. This flight is moving to B14. Announce a 90-minute delay, effective immediately, for an operational issue." Carlos nodded, looking relieved to escape, and quickly began making the announcement. The passengers groaned, but seeing the high-level drama, no one complained. They just began the slow, tired migration to the next gate. In moments, the crowded, chaotic gate B12 was empty, save for Keisha, Chen, Brenda, and Mark. The silence was deafening. "Now," Chen said, turning back to his employees, "tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning. And do not lie. Dr. Washington is an FAA inspector. Lying to her is the same as lying to the NTSB. It is a crime." Brenda began a long, rambling, semi-coherent defense. She was just... Her ticket was basic. The flight was full. I was just following policy. And her bag. She put it in the sizer. But it looked big. And she was so aggressive. "Ms. Vance," Keisha interjected, "did you or did you not tell your supervisor, and me, that my name was associated with a red flag from corporate security?" Brenda's defense crumbled. "Yes." "And was that statement true?" "No." David Chen closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He let out a long, slow breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Brenda," he said. "Mark, you are both suspended, effective immediately. Give me your airport IDs. You will be escorted from the premises. Do not contact any other Global Airways employees. You will be hearing from Human Resources and our corporate legal team." "Suspended?" Brenda wailed. "David, no. I've been here 15 years. I'm a senior agent. It was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Brenda," Chen said, his voice like gravel. "It was malice. You used a security protocol as a weapon against a passenger because you didn't like her. And it just so happened that passenger was the one person in this airport who could bring this whole airline to its knees. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Please," Mark whispered. I just backed my agent." "That's the problem, Mark," Chen roared. "You backed her lie. You didn't verify. You were going to call TSA on an FAA inspector. Your career is over. Both of you. Get out." He pointed toward the terminal. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of their badges, Brenda and Mark began the long, silent walk of shame down the concourse, their footsteps echoing in the now empty gate area. Keisha watched them go. She felt no triumph, only a profound, cold anger and a familiar, deep weariness. It was, as she had analyzed, a system failure. She turned back to David Chen, who looked like he had aged a decade. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice all business. "Dr. Washington," he replied, defeated. "My investigation is just beginning. I'm not getting on that flight." "What? No, please, we'll put you in first class. The pilot will personally apologize. Mr. Chen, I am no longer traveling as a passenger. I am now here in my official capacity. Your airline has demonstrated a critical failure in security and compliance. I am grounding myself." "Grounding? What do you mean?" "I mean I am staying in Chicago. My briefing in D.C. will have to be postponed. My new priority is a full-scale audit of Global Airways O'Hare operations. I want the gate logs from this terminal for the last 72 hours. I want the involuntary denied boarding records for the last 6 months. And I want a full list of all formal passenger complaints filed against Ms. Vance and Mr. Jensen." Chen realized what was happening. This wasn't just about 2 employees getting fired. Keisha was pulling the thread. She suspected, as she had from the beginning, that this was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. "Of course," Chen said, his voice hollow. "We will cooperate fully. Whatever you need." "Good," Keisha said. She pulled her rollerboard back, the one that had been declared non-compliant. "I'll also need a secure office, a direct line to your records department, and a pot of very strong, very black coffee." Dr. Keisha Washington had missed her flight, but she was exactly where she needed to be. The real work was just getting started. For the next 2 weeks, Dr. Keisha Washington didn't go home. She postponed her NTSB briefing, rescheduled her other inspections, and, with the full backing of the FAA's regional administrator, embedded herself in the corporate offices of Global Airways at O'Hare. David Chen, true to his word, gave her everything she asked for. He knew that cooperation was his only path through the storm that was about to break. Keisha, assisted by 2 auditors from the FAA field office, began to dig. She was no longer just an investigator. She was an archaeologist, unearthing the buried history of Gate B-12. The first person she interviewed formally was Carlos Rodriguez, the junior agent. He was terrified, convinced he would be fired for being associated with the incident. "Mr. Rodriguez," Keisha said, her voice reassuring as they sat in a sterile conference room. "You are not in trouble. I am here to understand the system at that counter. Tell me about Ms. Vance." Carlos, after a long silence, finally spoke. "Brenda, she has a list, that's what we call it." "A list?" "A list of people she doesn't like. People on basic economy. People who, don't look like they belong in the priority line. People who ask too many questions." "And what does she do to people on this list?" "She finds things," Carlos said, looking at his hands. "A bag that's too heavy. A system glitch that lost their seat assignment. She'll stick them in a middle seat at the back by the lavatory. Or if the flight is full, she bumps them. She likes it. She says it's teaching them how to fly right." Keisha's blood ran cold. This was worse than she thought. It wasn't just implicit bias. It was an active, malicious, and repeated abuse of power. "And Mr. Jensen?" Keisha asked. Mark just wants an easy shift. As long as the planes get out on time, he doesn't care. Brenda has been here longer than him. He lets her do whatever she wants. He calls her his enforcer." "Thank you, Carlos. You've been very helpful," Keisha said. Armed with this, Keisha turned to the data. The hard karma she was about to deliver wasn't going to be loud and explosive. It was going to be quiet, meticulous, and buried in the pages of a 200-page federal report. The records told the whole story. Over the last 18 months, gate agent Brenda Vance had an involuntary denied boarding rate that was 450% higher than the airline's average. Of those denied boardings, 88% were for passengers of color or passengers with non-Western-sounding names. Furthermore, Keisha's team cross-referenced passenger complaints with Mark Jensen's supervisor logs. They found 54 separate complaints filed against Brenda Vance, ranging from rude and condescending to discriminatory. Mark Jensen had summarily dismissed every single one. His most common resolution notes were passenger non-compliant or agent-followed policy. He hadn't just ignored the problem, he had actively covered it up. The security flag lie was the final, fatal piece. It was the smoking gun that elevated this from a corporate HR matter to a federal compliance failure. The hard karma hit precisely 3 weeks after Keisha missed her flight. For Brenda Vance, her suspension became a termination. But it was far worse than that. The FAA, based on Keisha's report, officially cited her by name for willful falsification of security procedures in violation of 49 CFR. This citation effectively blacklisted her. Her SIDA badge was permanently revoked. She could never work in any capacity, for any airline, in any U.S. airport, ever again. She couldn't even be a janitor past the security checkpoint. Her 15-year career was over. She was also hit with a crippling 5-figure fine from the Department of Transportation for interference with a federal officer and falsification of a security threat. For Mark Jensen, he was also terminated. He lost his job, his benefits, and his entire 20-year pension, which the airline's legal team voided due to gross negligence and willful endangerment of the airline's operating certificate. The FAA report painted him as a systemic failure point, a manager who, through laziness and complicity, allowed a pattern of discrimination to flourish. He was last heard applying for a manager position at a rental car company. For Global Airways, this was the biggest blow. Keisha's audit resulted in one of the largest fines the FAA had levied that year. The airline was fined $1.2 million for systemic violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination by entities receiving federal funds, and for critical failures in security compliance. They were forced to retrain every single one of their 10,000-plus North American customer-facing employees. The script for this new mandatory training program was written in part by Dr. Keisha Washington. The airline's stock dipped 3% when the story, leaked by an angry employee, hit the press. For Carlos Rodriguez. In a moment of systemic correction, David Chen, after cleaning house, needed a new supervisor who understood the rules and had a proven record of integrity. Carlos, who had provided a clear, honest, and damning statement, was offered the promotion. He was now in charge of Gate B12, with a new mandate to treat every passenger with dignity. The shutdown of the counter had been temporary. The shutdown of the system that allowed Brenda Vance to thrive was permanent. A month can feel like a lifetime. For Dr. Keisha Washington, the past 30 days had been a blur of fluorescent-lit conference rooms, endless reams of data, and the bitter, stale taste of airline coffee. She had not gone home to D.C. She had not given her NTSB briefing. She had, instead, declared O'Hare's Terminal 2 her base of operations. The FAA had granted her full authority, and Global Airways had, with the terrified obedience of an organization staring down the barrel of a federal injunction, given her unrestricted access. Her investigation, which began as a single point of failure at Gate B12, had spiderwebbed out, revealing a systemic rot. The Brenda Vance file had become a case study in malice. Keisha and her 2-person audit team had personally interviewed 17 other passengers, all located through the 54 complaints Mark Jensen had buried, who told stories of missed funerals, ruined vacations, and humiliating, discriminatory encounters. They spoke of Brenda's special fee, a fictional charge she would levy on passengers she didn't like, or her safety hold, where she would randomly select passengers of color for extra screening until they missed their flights. Mark Jensen's complicity was, in Keisha's professional opinion, the more profound crime. He was the check and balance that had not only failed, but actively enabled the abuse. He had cultivated a toxic kingdom for Brenda, and in return, she made sure his flights always departed on time, no matter who got left in the wake. Keisha's final 214-page report was a masterpiece of cold, irrefutable logic. It was not an emotional plea, it was a data-driven indictment. It laid out, in excruciating detail, the 450% higher involuntary denied boarding rate, the 88% demographic skew, the 54 buried complaints, and the terminal-wide failure of security protocols, all culminating in the fabricated red flag incident. The consequences, as detailed in Part 6, had been swift, brutal, and precise. The hard karma had been delivered not by fate, but by federal regulation. Now, 31 days after the incident, Dr. Keisha Washington was back at O'Hare, standing once again at Gate B12. The terminal smelled the same, that unchanging, evocative soup of Cinnabon, jet fuel, and human anxiety. But the gate itself felt entirely different. The old worn podium had been replaced with a sleek, new branded counter. The Global Airways logo was a brighter shade of blue. But the most significant change was the atmosphere. It was quiet, it was professional, it was tense. The new agents, all wearing sharp, freshly pressed uniforms, moved with a kind of deliberate, almost fearful precision. They smiled at every passenger. They spoke in clear, measured tones. Keisha watched them for 5 minutes before she even approached. They were, she noted, following the new de-escalation and dignity protocol to the letter, a protocol that she herself had written the first draft for. At the head of the counter, acting as supervisor, was Carlos Rodriguez. He saw her from 20 feet away. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in a kind of profound, startled recognition. He immediately stood straighter and whispered something to the agent at his side, who also glanced at Keisha and then quickly looked back at her screen, her hands visibly tightening on her keyboard. The legend had arrived. Keisha walked forward, her same black, hard-shell rollerboard clicking softly on the tile floor. "Dr. Washington," Carlos said, stepping out from behind the counter. He was wearing a supervisor's name tag now, and his uniform was immaculate. He looked older, more tired, but also more confident. We weren't expecting you. I mean, you're on the manifest, but it's an honor to see you." "Supervisor Rodriguez," Keisha said, offering a small professional nod. "Just Keisha is fine when I'm off the clock. I'm just a passenger today, flying to Reagan." "Of course," he said, his voice dropping. I just wanted to say, Dr. Washington, on behalf of me, thank you. What you did here, it changed everything." "I was just doing my job, Carlos," she said quietly. "Are things better?" Carlos let out a long breath. It's like a different airline. The training you mandated. People were angry at first, embarrassed, but now it's just easier." He gestured to the gate area. "No shouting, no arguments. We just follow the rules, the real rules. The Brenda Vance story is, well, it's what they tell new hires on day one. A cautionary tale." He paused, then added, "You know, the strangest thing, our on-time departure rate has actually improved. Because we're not spending 30 minutes fighting with passengers, we decided to bully." "Good," Keisha said. That, to her, was the ultimate proof. A system built on fairness was, by its very nature, more efficient. That's good to hear. It shouldn't have taken what happened to you, Carlos said, for us to just be decent. But thank you. Keep up the good work, Supervisor, she said. She then moved to the counter, to the new agent, a young woman whose name tag read Maria. Maria looked up, her smile polite but strained. She had clearly been pre-warned. Good morning, Keisha said, sliding her driver's license onto the scanner. Good morning, Dr. Washington, Maria said, her voice a little shaky. Welcome. I have you here for Flight 714 to D.C. That's correct, Keisha said. Basic economy. She said the words deliberately. A test. Maria didn't even flinch. Wonderful, Maria said, her training kicking in. I have your seat confirmed at 14B. Just to let you know, we are a completely full flight today, but your seat is secure. I see you have your carry-on. Her eyes flicked to the bag, then back to Keisha's face. It looks perfectly compliant, so you are all set. We will be boarding in about 20 minutes, starting with pre-boarding and then moving by groups. Thank you, Maria. That's very clear. Of course. Maria then hesitated before her new protocol took over. Dr. Washington, since you are in Group 5, I know the wait can be a bit long. Can I offer you a complimentary voucher for a coffee or a bottle of water at the shop next door? On behalf of Global Airways. Keisha smiled, a genuine small smile. The service recovery gesture was now a proactive dignity gesture. It was a tiny 300 line item, but it spoke volumes. It was an apology, codified into policy. A water would be lovely, Keisha said. Thank you. Maria printed the voucher and handed it to her, her hands steady now. Have a wonderful flight, Doctor. Keisha took the voucher and her boarding pass and walked to the waiting area. She sat down, her back to the wall, where she could observe. The first test was passed. They had treated her, the known entity, with textbook perfection. Now, for the real test. As she waited, she watched the gate function, and, as it always does, a problem arose. A young man, looking like a college student, ran up to the counter, out of breath. He was carrying a massive, overstuffed duffel bag that looked like it contained a semester's worth of laundry and textbooks. I'm for Flight 749, he panted, throwing his ID on the counter. Am I too late? Not at all, sir, Maria said calmly. We haven't started boarding. Let me check you in. She typed. Ah, Mr. Harrison. Yes, I have you here. Now, I do have to address the bag. Oh, the kid said, his face falling. Is it too big? I'm afraid so, sir, Maria said. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. It's quite a bit larger than the carry-on limit. We'll have to check this for you. Oh, no. No, the student stammered. I can't. I don't have the money for the fee. My card is maxed out. I have to get home. Please. Keisha leaned forward. This was the moment. This was the Brenda scenario. An overbooked flight. A non-compliant passenger with a cheap ticket. This was the moment where the agent held all the power. Before Maria could even respond, Carlos stepped over. He didn't loom. He smiled. Having a little trouble, Mr. Harrison? He asked. My bag. She said I have to pay. I don't have the $75, he said, his voice cracking with panic. Okay, Carlos said, putting his hands up in a placating gesture. Let's not panic. We have a few minutes. Let's look at the options. First, let's just try the sizer. Maybe it just looks big. They walked to the metal sizer, the very same one from that day. The bag, of course, didn't come close to fitting. All right, Carlos said, unfazed. So policy says it has to be checked, but policy doesn't say we can't help you. Do you have another smaller bag inside that duffel? Like a backpack? Yeah, a small one, the kid said. Great. Let's do this. For the next 3 minutes, Carlos and Maria helped the student repack on the floor. They pulled out a small backpack, into which they stuffed his laptop and books. They took out a heavy coat for him to carry. The now lighter duffel bag was compressed, squeezed, and zipped. Now try, Carlos said. The student pushed the bag into the sizer. It was tight, but with a final shove, it slid in. There you go, Carlos said, pulling it out. Compliant. You'll have to put it in the bin sideways, but it'll fly. No charge. The student looked like he was about to cry with relief. Thank you, he whispered. Oh my God, thank you so much. Not a problem, Carlos said, patting him on the shoulder. We're all just trying to get somewhere. Have a good flight. Keisha sat back, and for the first time in a month, she felt the massive, crushing weight of the audit lift from her shoulders. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just for her. The system was working. They had de-escalated. They had found a solution. They had treated a panicked passenger with dignity. She had won. The boarding process began. First class. Group 1. Group 2. She waited, reading the preliminary notes for her postponed NTSB briefing. Finally, the last call came. We now invite our passengers in Group 5, Basic Economy, to board. Dr. Keisha Washington stood up. She tucked her file away, retrieved her voucher for water, and joined the end of the line, just another face in the crowd. When she reached the podium, Carlos was the one scanning the passes. He took her boarding pass and scanned it. Beep. Dr. Washington, he said, meeting her eye. His was formal, but his eyes were smiling. Welcome aboard Flight 712. We are truly glad to have you flying with us today. Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez, she replied, a genuine warmth in her voice. Keep up the good work. We will, he promised. She turned and walked down the jet bridge, the familiar tunnel between the world and the sky. She stepped onto the aircraft, found her seat, 1401B, a non-reclining middle seat by the galley, exactly as her ticket prescribed, and stowed her perfectly compliant bag in the overhead bin. She sat down, clicked her seatbelt, and pulled out her NTSB file. The plane door closed with a pressurized thud. The engines began to whine. Dr. Keisha Washington, a federal inspector in a tracksuit, looked out the window as the ground crew pulled the gate away. Her work at O'Hare was finished. Her work in D.C. was just about to begin. The system had failed, the system had been audited, and the system was, for now, holding. And for her, that was all that mattered. The power of a uniform isn't in the person wearing it. It's in the system they represent. For Brenda Vance, that power was a weapon. But for Dr. Keisha Washington, her credentials were a shield, not just for herself, but for every passenger who had ever been mistreated, profiled, or dismissed. Hard karma isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet audit that rewrites the entire system. Brenda didn't just lose her job. She became a training manual example of what not to do. What did you think of Keisha's response? Have you ever witnessed a Karen at an airport only to see it backfire in the most epic way? Let me know your own travel horror stories in the comments below. If you believe that karma always finds its address, hit that like button, share this story with a friend, and be sure to subscribe for more true life drama where the small are made strong.